What up, everybody? We are back. Brand new episode of R2C2. You already know that something's a little different because it'd be C saying, we're back, another episode, R2C2. But C is away this week, tending to a family matter, so he'll be back with us next week. But we're lucky because we get to work with a lot of really not only interesting and awesome, but capable people that give us incredible options for co-hosts if one of us is to miss a given week. And this week, we get to chat with a person who checks all those boxes and is also one of my closest friends. She is the lead analyst for the Nets on the Yes Network. She does work for Fox Sports, CBS Sports. She has a new podcast for Sirius XM. And, I guess actually the podcast, NBA Pulse, Sarah, is that with iHeart? Where's the new podcast?
That's with iHeart.
iHeart,
I didn't want to
sorry.
correct you.
Yeah,
you were on a roll.
Yeah.
And
I
you
was on a
already
roll.
called me capable, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to correct you after that.
Well, Sarah has a brand new podcast, NBA Pulse, with iHeart, and she just does a bunch of amazing things, and she's one of my closest friends, and she's so talented and so awesome, and we're so happy to have Sarah Kustok filling in, co-hosting with me on R2C2. Thank you, partner, for doing this.
I'm honored. I'm psyched. And you're going from one Yes Nets analyst to another, because you do remember when CC made the guest appearance as a Brooklyn Nets Yes Network analyst. That was probably my favorite game I've ever called, was sitting next to him. And I wish we could do it again. So not to say that I wish CC were here instead of you, Rooks, but maybe.
Well, we have to at some point get CC back with you on the pod, the three of us. That was such a good time, the three of us calling that game. And it was during still the COVID setup where the Nets, it was a preseason game on the road. I think the Nets were maybe at Boston. And it was pre-Harden trade, but it was one of our first looks at KD, Kyrie with Karras and Spencer Dinwiddie and Jared Allen and everything else. And CC was really excited about it, and we were sitting at Barclays Center calling off of monitors together. And I'll never forget, first of all, CC did a wonderful job, but I'll never forget C's face when there was about 30 seconds left in the game and he accidentally dropped his first F-bomb. He almost made it through.
The fact he made it that long, though? Oh, he was tremendous. He was tremendous.
So good.
I do. I don't know who we need to talk to. You have more pull than I do, Rooks, over at the Yes Network.
Do I? Who has pull, I guess? I'm not sure.
I don't know, but I think it'd be an easy switch to kick Richard Jefferson, out from the seat and just bring C in.
Do you think Ian is the one who really has pull? Maybe Ian is the one we have to go to if we really want to get things done.
Do you think? I know.
You know he's the one?
I think that's facts.
He's the one. You know what's funny about this is, so Ian and I, and this will be a little inside baseball, so to speak, but some people may find the dynamics interesting. So Sarah and I work together on Nets broadcasts. We have for 10 years now in some capacity. And Ian does now about 40 Nets games. I do 30 something plus. And then there's other games that go to national TV. And then Justin Shackle will fill in on a few, or Chris Carino. Before them, obviously, it was Michael Grady before he went to Minnesota. But it's really interesting because, I'm there enough that, I have very clear observations and experiences of dynamics and, kind of just how we go through travel and everything else. And it feels like one thing. And then, obviously, Ian is there even more than me. And he obviously has very defined experiences and protocols and how you go through things. And Ian and I, even though we don't ever really work together, are really, really, really close. We're really close. Ian is the person I go to if I have any kind of advice that I need in this industry, in this business. He's the person who I go to, who always he's had the most incredible open heart to me from the time I started here. And so it feels like we work together, and we do, but we really don't. We just kind of replace each other, right? And you, though, Sarah, you experienced both of us. So I always think it's funny.
So am I the luckiest person in the world?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
But I just think it's funny because you have your Nets experience always, and Ian and I are popping in and out, and it feels very defined. But like, I'm sure it's different when like Ian isn't scared of turbulence and I am, and you're looking across the aisle and seeing me like biting my nails and Ian maybe just sleeping.
Everyone has their nuances, their quirks, if you would call it, the beauty of who they are, and I appreciate it in both of you. You're both 101, so the enthusiasm and excitement for me it always remains high.
What's a quirk I have broadcasting? Is there anything interesting or strange that I do that I might not necessarily be aware of that you are because of how much you work with me?
List?
You can break out the list.
You probably have talked about this on the podcast. I mean, do people know about your vocal exercises
they know.
Before we start?
They know. Yes.
I would also say there's nothing, I think that to start with, I think watching you eat your pregame meals to make sure that you're nourished, the fact that you have hot waters come every time out. So
there you go. That's a good,
I don't want to be the one to say it, but making it through the game, if there's overtime, is always a roll of the dice.
Yeah, they have to run to that bathroom at the end.
The last thing I'll say, which is it's the most wonderful part of it, I feel like every time I sit down next to you and you're doing a broadcast, your enthusiasm is as though it's the first broadcast you have ever done and the only one you will ever do. You have so much joy in doing it that it could be middle of the season. You could have been flying in on a red eye. It doesn't matter. You always are so excited and grateful to do the job we're doing. And I appreciate it because that filters into all of us, that type of energy. It's the best, Rooks. So that's the thing that stands out to me most about sitting next to you.
You see, this is why I love Sarah. I teed her up to make fun of me, and instead she granted me a very generous and
I make fun of you enough on the broadcast.
Yeah,
I
that's
hope
true.
people know that it's because I love you and care about you, and you're one of my besties.
Sarah's not afraid to needle on the broadcast. But thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that, and we're so pumped to have you and to dive into, I think, what's been an amazing NBA year. Obviously, our Nets right now and what they're doing. Before we dive headfirst into hoops, which we will in a moment, just wanted to start briefly and send our well wishes and prayers to Damar Hamlin, his family. Obviously, everybody connected to the sports world and beyond has had Damar at the foremost thoughts of their mind since what happened on Monday night. Sarah, I know for you, I'm sure you had a unique experience as the news came in because you were calling Nets Spurs. I was watching Nets Spurs. I actually hadn't tuned. I wasn't going to flip to the Monday Night Football game until the Nets game was over. And all of a sudden, Troy texted me, our colleague and good friend Troy Benjamin, and he was like, dude, I think someone may have just died on the football field. And I was like, what? And, then obviously what's happened. And, as we sit here Wednesday afternoon at noon, the latest update, some promising stuff. Adam Schefter Instagrammed out a report saying doctors saw promising signs of progress overnight from Damar Hamlin, who remained hospitalized in critical condition as of Wednesday morning, according to a friend and business partner of the Bills' safety. Jordan Rooney told ESPN's Coley Harvey that Hamlin is still in intensive care at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center less than 2 days after he went into cardiac arrest on the field during the Bills game against the Bengals. Rooney told ESPN Hamlin is still sedated, but doctors saw promising readings overnight from him that they had hoped to see by Wednesday morning. Hamlin's agent, Ron Butler, told ESPN's Jeremy Fowler on Tuesday night that Hamlin's oxygen levels had improved. So obviously it's a horrible situation, something that has everyone on edge and thinking and praying for Damar, but hopefully the news keeps going in that direction, Sarah.
Yeah, and I just there's so many layers to this. As you said, first and foremost, the thoughts, the prayers, all of it, not only for Damar, but for his family, for his friends, for those that he loves, care about him, his teammates, the thought of that, his teammates, his opponents, those on the field, every player that plays football. I mean, it goes on. And I think you just, it puts him to perspective for as much as I know we're going to get into the NBA and I know people are talking about the NFL and playoffs, all of this. In that moment, I think, however we heard it, to your point, was calling the Nets Spurs game. And there was a lot of jubilance of, big lead, great game, Brooklyn winning their 12th straight game where, Kiki King on the broadcast, having fun and enjoying. And then at some point, at the end, Frank DeGrace, our great producer of Yes, had sent a text and gave us a little bit more on the information. And it just, you shut down in a sense of understanding just what sports is in the context of life. And the family, and for him, and I know everyone had him in thoughts and prayers, all that, but that can take for these players, the mental toll that takes, thinking about that could be them, thinking about their brother. There's just so much to it, and so just it hits your heart and it hits your gut in a different way. And it's something that I think we all need to keep in our hearts, keep in our minds as the days go on, not just in the short term.
And I think that, one of the beautiful parts of the sort of the communal coming together in the aftermath of what happened to Damar is, you just go look at the GoFundMe for his toy drive. As we sit here recording this podcast, it's over $6 million. I think their goal was to get, it was like 2,500 or 25,000 for the tour drive, and it's over $6 million. And you see, and you saw the family statement about the way people reached out to them, and it's people often harp on what's wrong with our world, and how much bad there is out there, and of course that exists, but the vast majority of humans have beautiful hearts. And, when it's not being, and our attention isn't being manipulated by, social media that has algorithmically picked us apart to figure out how to trigger, sort of the worst versions of ourselves or the most inflammatory versions of ourselves, and people kind of like get into the humanity of themselves. You see how beautiful, most of this world is. And I think that, seeing that in the aftermath of what happened to Damar is you never want there to have to be a reason at anyone's expense to get that reminder, of course. But it's one of the sort of encouraging or uplifting aspects as you work through something difficult and dark, seeing the way people come together and they're like, wait, hold on a second. All of us want one thing right now. We want that man to get better. And we're going to do anything we can to help him and his family. And so hopefully that provides his family with a little warm blanket of comfort as they deal with the terror of going through this. And hopefully his spirits are lifted by it as well, unconsciously, and then he comes out of this eventually on the other side.
Yeah, and that is like all of those things, and I think it's just a show of, in those moments of feeling helpless, it's ways that people think they can help, and that matters, and that's important, for people. But I also, think that just the idea, the understanding of this young man was living out a dream, working towards a dream. We all talk about sacrifices that we make towards goals, towards dreams, compromises we make. And I think it is just a harsh reminder of different circumstances as you look at what those men do when they step on the football field. It's a sacrifice where he potentially is risking his life. And that's it circles back to put it in perspective and have our prayers, our thoughts, our love, everything anyone could do. I think that's where you're putting that type of energy towards.
And well said, Sarah. And it to kind of echo your sentiment, Michael Kay, our colleague, always talks about, hey, we're in the toy store, we're in the candy store, talking about what we get to do, talking about sports, and obviously this and sports in general, this kind of puts that in perspective. So as we transition to talk about NBA, we have that perspective obviously in the back of our minds, Sarah. And, you found out that news when you were calling Nets Spurs. It was the Nets' 12th straight win. They played a beautiful basketball game. It was the kind of game where I was watching, I was just like, my gosh, this is this is just so fun to watch, the way they're sharing the basketball. You had Mbappe and Hakimi sitting courtside, loving every minute of it, which was just so cool. Did you go up to Mbappe, by the way? Because
I didn't.
You didn't. He was only three seats away.
Unlike you, Rooks. I think of you when we went, when Kobe Bryant, of course. And Gianna were at the game, and it was you who I went with you, because I don't like to bother people. I don't like to.
You needed me there to break the
coming
ice.
up and taking pictures. So no, I kind of like to let people, as much as they can experience their experience they are in. I obviously did take videos and was checking out what they're watching.
You just made it like creepy, like unauthorized videos.
Super creepy, and then I kept talking about it on the broadcast of my admiration of those two individuals, their skills on the football field. But it was great. It was the vibe, the energy inside the arena, the atmosphere. I know we had a good amount of road games throughout the course of December, but it felt different. And so to have those two individuals sitting there courtside, it was fun.
As a real brief aside, who gave you the greatest World Cup final recap of all time?
Rooks. I mean, I felt like that would be the only reason I would have to go talk to Mbappe to tell him the recap. Was I flying? I can't remember.
You were flying.
I think I was in flight, and my flight was delayed. There was all sorts of circumstances. So for the listeners, I did not get to actually watch probably the greatest match that was ever played. And so thanks to you on the bus on our way to Detroit,
we were doing the Arena. Yep, to Little Caesars Arena.
I feel like I've watched it all. That's the brilliance of your broadcast talent.
I literally gave Sarah like an actual like play-by-play breakdown of everything that happened in that game, including the near chances at the end of regulation. But to your point, there was a cool energy about having those guys courtside. It's also cool, I think, when you see athletes who are as accomplished as a Kevin Durant, clearly, I'm not going to say starstruck, but just clearly so thrilled and excited by the presence of another, fellow star. Like you could see Sarah after, KD posted like 3 or 4 different things on his Instagram story afterwards. There were different pictures of videos of interactions with Mbappe and Hakimi. And for those who don't know Hakimi, he's Mbappe's teammate on PSG. Obviously, soccer fans know, and they're like, what do you mean we don't know? But for those who just know Mbappe because he transcends to a different plane, Hakimi is also, a top player in the world who just was incredible for Morocco in their historic run to the semifinals, and is one of Mbappe's teammates on PSG, Paris Saint-Germain. But but you could see, Sarah, that like even for the guys, like for Kyrie, for Kevin Durant, for everyone in the locker room, they were like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. Well, because they did. They came through the locker room afterwards. I also think just the amount of normally, I don't know if blowouts are normally fun game. I mean, they're enjoyable when it's,
your team.
When it's the team that, you have a little bit more vested interest in. But it was a fun, to your point, fun game, fun style. Everyone was engaged throughout. It was cool.
During the 12-game winning streak, obviously the Nets have, I think, with the general populace, reestablish a credibility. For many, they've reemerged as a potential contender. I think they've gotten back to a place of legitimacy when it comes to just basketball being the focus for so many people. For you, watching them play, and someone who like really has their finger on the pulse of this team and has for a decade, what has stood out most to you about this winning streak? And even beyond that, just, you could say the run of 16 out of 17 or really the team since Jock took over.
One, the understanding of their identity in the style they want to play and the consistency now that we've started to see throughout. And the fact that they've been able to play how they play on the defensive end, like that's always been with this group, even when this group was a group on paper for the last couple seasons and you knew the talent, you knew the offensive talent, it always came down to, well, will they be able to defend? And the consistency of which they've figured out what lineups they want to use, what combinations, the switching scheme, how they've improved in this scheme with their communication, rotations, continuity, which it doesn't happen overnight. And I think there's so much scrutiny on this group that was the anticipation. And now you're starting to see that players getting healthy and getting whole, but they're long and they've started to figure out how to gang rebound. They started to figure out how to get stops. And that in turn allows them to get runouts, to flow into their offense. They are best when they have early offense. Offensively, again, the game planning and organization of figuring out, okay, we want to play fast. It may not show up in the numbers and pace, but what that means is we're going to get the ball up the floor quickly. Kai or Kevin, they're going to if they can go isolation, if we can get a quick look, we will. If not, we're going to move the ball. We're going to have a lot of actions. And then the ball will eventually, if there's nothing that shows up, will find its way back to Kevin or Kyrie. And I think the understanding of roles of different players, there's just such a good energy with how the ball is moving, how they're sharing the ball. And I think everyone feels a part of that. Secondly, I just think guys they're playing hard. They're having fun. They're engaged. They're playing for one another. Like that shifts everything. And that happened, I think, early on with Jock and just once they started to win. But the concept of winning is fun. And I think they're getting greedy with it. It's one thing to say, but now they're getting greedy of, we want to keep this win streak going. So I think the approach, which you didn't even necessarily see at the early part of the win streak, of how they approached opponents, whether it's the best of the best or quote unquote lesser opponents, their mentality and their approach is the same day in, day out. And I think even looking at the San Antonio game, for example, or just different, that to me is a characteristic of a team that has an opportunity to be really great, that it's not about who they're playing on paper. It's about improving themselves. And I think those things of the identity, how they want to play, and then just actually having that type of engagement on a day-by-day basis, a quarter-by-quarter basis is something that's really pushed them to another level.
You know what I thought was interesting? In the beginning of this winning streak, Jock Vaughn revealed that they changed what they would say in the huddle.
Yeah. Good.
And so he said they used to break the huddle and they would say trust. And now they say win. And his point was, he said, trust takes time to build. Like for us to just expect everybody to trust everybody, it's like it takes husbands and wives time to build that. It takes siblings and cousins, family members, best friend. Like trust is something that you don't just like give away right away. Let's just win. And then the trust will come. And let's make winning the focus. And what I think was so critical is they literally, because in the beginning of this winning streak, there was a lot of games where they kind of eked it out. Yeah. Maybe they were playing a lesser opponent talent-wise and just kind of, found a way to win. And I really think their sole focus was just do what we got to do to win today, period, the end. No matter who's in, who's out, whatever, just find a way to win. And sort of embrace that. And that was the beginning of the streak. And then all of a sudden, things have gotten more and more impressive, cohesive. The opponents and they've beaten have gotten better. They've won blowouts. They've looked more fluid. They've talked about how the trust is growing. And I think it's all stemmed from making winning the focus. And one thing that I heard before the season, which I know sort of got lost because they started slowly, and obviously they had a coaching change, and then what happened with Kyrie's suspension, everything else. But before the season, there was that focus as well, where even when I'm listening to Kyrie in his season opening press conference at Media Day, and he was, asked about what are you guys trying to prove? And he had some answer to the effect of we're not trying to prove anything. We know that can't be done. We're just trying to win. And it was such a difference, I think, from kind of the scary hours, watch what we can do. It's nah, we're just going to try and win because talk is cheap and we now know that. And I think that them embracing that kind of brought them to this very unique place of, or maybe it's not unique, but to this essential place of it's all about ball. Just win. Just try and win. That's it. That's all this group. Because if you do that, everything else is going to take care of itself. And that's been the focus. And they're super talented. They also, I think they put together a really good roster. Whether it's Utah Watanabe or TJ Warren or signing back Nick Claxton, who has just blossomed. Edmund Sumner, who gave them kind of a change of pace, fast backup guard, getting Joe Harris's length back, trading for Royce O'Neal. One thing people, didn't focus on it as much because things felt messy, and they were at the end of last year, is one of the number one reasons the Nets did not win any of those close games against the Celtics in their first round sweep is because they were so small. They were small. There was times where you'd have Dragic, Kyrie, and Curry on the floor together, or I feel like there was moments where you even had Mills on the floor with those three. Like, Joe was hurt. They didn't have Royce O'Neal. They didn't have TJ Warren. They didn't have Yuta Watanabe. Well, now that's four guys I just mentioned who all hit threes, who have size. And I just think the roster constitution, Sarah, is really good. And look, we're about to get into the rest of the league, and there's a lot of formidable teams out there. But I think the best approach with the Nets is to say, keep proving it, because it's been the theoretical contender for however many years, right? But I do think one thing people forget is they were besieged by injuries 2 seasons ago. Otherwise, they probably would have won the finals. And so to think that the Kyrie KD combo doesn't translate to wins, we know this. Well, hold on a second. Last year had a lot of messy mitigating circumstances. This year, plenty of drama in the beginning of it, no doubt. But look at the basketball they're playing right now. Maybe it does work as long as they're healthy and all engaged. And that's what they are right now.
Yeah, I think health is a huge factor. And to your point, last season, when so much has transpired, you forget some of the details. The Nets were in first in the East until Kevin Durant got hurt in December. Yep. To your point, just there's not always been a lot of runway for getting accustomed to one another. I would even say that about Kevin and Kyrie for being best of friends for all the actual amount of time prior to this or throughout the course of the last however many years spent together, playing together. And sometimes those adjustments happen immediately and are really fluid. And sometimes how you want it to best flourish and work takes a little bit of time. But to your point about the roster, I think there's so many occasions, and I know I'm sitting next to you when this is happening, where you're like, man, they're long, they're quick. They have an ability to be versatile. They also have guys that can stretch you out. And I think that's where their buy-in now on the defensive end. And I think rebounding is a key component of that because they don't have anyone, big bruising. But I don't know if they need that. And I don't know if that necessarily would benefit them with the style and the way that they're playing now.
I agree. And that's why it's would you give up one of your shooting wings to try and go get someone who's a little more girthy, burly, and helps you on the glass? Or are you better off having more depth there so that if one of them goes down, you're covered, or it's an interesting quandary for Sean Marks. I think the bottom line is, and one last thing on them, Kyrie is playing otherworldly. Kevin is, so many role players are. Just on Ben really quickly, Sarah, I feel like you were bullish on how he would fit last year when the Harden stuff was starting to bubble. You're like, get Ben here. I feel like he'd be a really good fit. It feels like, and the numbers bear it out as of now, he complements Kyrie and Kevin so well. What has stood out to you about Ben and his impact during this streak?
A lot of things you would anticipate that were what he was. And what you expect him now to be as he's gotten more healthy, the smothering defense, guarding 1 through 5. We talked a lot about him pushing the pace. He's done absolutely that and more with the quickness and the advancement of the ball. I like how assertive he's being in attacking and looking for some of his short shots around the basket. I was not fully aware of twofold. He's tall, he's big. We know he's a good pass. He sees there are passes he sees, and his ability to get it in a shooter's pocket, catch a guy in stride, whether it's a full court, whether it's a cross court pass. That I didn't realize that he had such precision and such excellent vision in finding guys and leading guys to baskets. And secondly, it's a small thing. He's a big body. Right?
Yeah,
he's a big body. He sets so many little random screens, and whether they're real screens, whether it's just a dribble handoff and kind of getting in front of where a player's, he frees up players and gives them an extra step of room an extra 6 inches, especially for shooters and year-round shooters, just by his feel and understanding for the game and how he facilitates the offense. That I think there's time and time again, I'm hitting the talkback bucket button to our producer, Frank. Ben's the one who and you need to be paying close attention to him or sitting where we do sometimes to see it. But it's the little things. And to me, that's how he helps the offense to function in those ways. Aren't going to show up on a stat sheet, but they're very, very important for why they've been as dynamic as they have.
And you know what? When you have a bunch of guys who could shoot and who could score, sometimes it's all right to have one guy who isn't worried about how many shots he gets.
Yeah. You know, at some point, the only thing to me is, at some point, especially in the post, like the free throws, I think this for both Claxton and Simmons.
Yes.
I don't think either of them have shied away from getting to the line, but I think at some point that, that's end of the game. You're closing out the game.
Right. Can you have them both on the floor if they're going to shoot 30%?
50%? Yeah. Those are areas that, now we're kind of covering over, but when it comes down to really, really closing out games, that's going to be things that you're going to have to take a closer look at.
Well, that's what's so interesting about playoff basketball is, there are little nuanced differences that end up being the reason you win or you lose a game and thus a series that maybe don't stand out until you get in a series and you see them playing out. And like one thing that was so clear to me last year watching the NBA Finals was like, at this point in time in the NBA, everybody you put on the floor has to at least be competent on both ends. Like you can't, that specialist who you can heat seek on the defensive end, he can't play in the finals. Like he might be able to play in the first round, maybe even the second round. By the time you get to the conference finals and finals, he can't play. Yeah. And so I look at the East right now, Sarah. We obviously did a deep dive on the Nets, are the hottest team in the NBA, having won 12 straight, playing Chicago Wednesday night. We're recording Wednesday afternoon. This comes out Thursday morning, so we'll see if they got to 13 straight. You then have right now, you have the Celtics, only a half game in front of the Nets, remarkably. The Bucks, 3, a game and a half behind the Celtics. Cavs, 4, Sixers, 5, Pacers, 6. And then the play-in territory, Heat, 7. They've been playing better lately, though. Knicks, 8. They've had an interesting wild ride lately with a lot of good, then some bad, and getting back good. Hawks, 9. Wizards, 10. Bulls on the outside, and the Raptors as well. Let's look at the top 5, because I don't know about you. I put those teams right in a different category. Celtics, Nets, Bucks, Cavs, Sixers. Only 3 games separate those 5 teams. Now, if they all finish in the top 5, it's going to be essential to want to be in one of those top 3 spots, because you don't want to have to go through one of those 5 in the first round to start what's going to be a laborious road to the finals, right? For a bunch of teams that think they can get there. But I'll throw this to you. You have your NBA Pulse podcast. You obviously you call games nonstop.
Thanks for the pump. Thanks for the shout out.
You got it. On iHeartMedia podcast. That's right. You see this league. You watch it night in, night out. Not just with the Nets, which you watch it plenty with that, but there's other ways you do too. Of those 5 teams, taking the Nets out of it, so let's say the other 4, who is standing out to you, or what are kind of like just some of your first thoughts on thinking about those teams and projecting ahead to the playoffs? Like, is there a clear-cut one to you? Is there a team that's like, people don't think about them one, but come playoff time, this is going to be tough about them? What's kind of, you've seen all these teams, what kind of stands out to you?
I think some of it is just our gut when you watch them, the ebbs and flows of a season. I obviously would say Boston. I don't know if clear cut is as direct as I feel or as definitive as I feel about them, but you look at a variety of things with that group. The continuity matters. Finals experience matters. Multiple Eastern Conference final experience with much of that core matters. Jason Tatum, how he's been playing, him and Jalen and figuring. I know, a week or 2 ago, they kind of hit a little bit of a skid. maybe some questions about how in general would they go through stretches that they wouldn't be able to function as highly offensively as the historic numbers they were putting up at the start of the season. But they're a group to me that you talk about having big, long, switchable wings, guys that can score, that can play fast. They, to me, in some ways are a cut above the rest. And I don't know if that becomes a prisoner of the moment with Milwaukee and how they've just been struggling as of late, and whether that's a missing Chris Middleton, whether that's we've won a championship last season. We understood, we kind of went into it of the regular season. Maybe we don't have to steamroll everyone to figure things out. I think they got some players too with the Bucks that probably aren't performing. Drew Holiday has been in and out and been sick. Mentioned Middleton. Like, you've got some players that you would think. I'm curious how Joe Ingles continues to come back now that he is, and how his health looks. Giannis has been extraordinary, but just doesn't feel to have enough help. But to me, it seems silly to say that the Bucks also aren't right up there at the top of teams that you would be, think that they could have a runway to the finals as well. But there's a small part of me that those are two teams, whether it's a trust factor and seeing what they've done, or whether it's the continuity of those groups, that I would kind of give the bump to. Philly's interesting to me. And Philly to me probably is how many, maybe still, but before would view the Brooklyn Nets of health as such a major component. Mm-hmm. And their upside and their potential is the ceiling sky high. But where's the floor? The floor is probably a lot lower than any of those other
the Bucks or the Celtics floor.
Celtics, right. Yeah. And before we get into the Cavs, but that's where Philly, how does Embiid still look like the MVP candidate? Does he stay healthy? Tyrese Maxey, is he back yet? He's almost back. He's coming off the bench. Right. I don't know what's happening, but I think he's close. Yes,
he played 27 minutes their game against New Orleans the other night.
But so that's, I think just the fit of that group and the potential, because when we've seen them play well, they look so dominant. And when you have a player like Embiid and Harden, obviously, like we saw I felt like when Harden first came to Brooklyn, I was in awe of so many aspects of his game that I think are still transferable regardless of how his body is feeling or the conditioning he's on and what he needs to do. But I have a lot of questions, and I don't have as much trust with Philadelphia, though I do think that if they start putting things together, if they have guys healthy, I love Cleveland. I am a huge fan of this Cavs team. Will they need a little bit more experience actually getting into the postseason, the playoffs together? But like with the Donovan Mitchell stuff, which, obviously you get a little blinded, someone coming off a 71-point game. Yeah. But he's got a ton of playoff experience, and not necessarily obviously with the same group, but the way Garland can play, those bigs. I mean, we're familiar with Jared Allen, but to have a front court like that though returns back to your question of how does that play? How do those lineups translate into the postseason? And what does that look like for teams either need to match up against them, or is there a point that's too big and you're not necessarily able to win in the manner you need to in closing out games? But I'm high on Cleveland, and Cleveland's a team that if I were really taking a gamble or risk, say, hey, this could be a group that could make a run, just because back to the chemistry factor and enjoying one another. Like they're an interesting group, but the offensive side, like, I don't know where you feel in terms of postseason basketball or the possession game, but when there's teams that may potentially have struggle scoring and you need a bucket, are you going to be able to get a bucket? That's where sometimes the question marks then come up with that group. It's
so interesting. First of all, the NBA is just such a wildly entertaining product. It really is. Like the other night, I'm watching the show KD and Kyrie are putting on with Mbappe watching, and then all of a sudden Donovan Mitchell drops 71, and I'm like, what is going on? And then you have like what the Thunder did to the Celtics Tuesday night, and you're like, huh? It's just, it really is great. And right now, the thing that stands out most to me about those teams we just went through is they're all really good. Like they're all really good. Like you can make, it would not surprise me at all if any of those teams were in the conference finals. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. And It might surprise me a little bit if like the Cavs made it to the finals, because it feels like maybe they're still young in their journey.
Right.
But it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Sixers did. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Nets did. Wouldn't surprise me, obviously, at all if the Celtics or Bucks did. And that's not even accounting for like a Miami, who obviously seems to have taken a step back from last year, but is always dangerous, always lurking and playing a little better. And we know they play well that time of year often. So it's not just, sometimes parity can mask mediocrity. This is not mediocrity. This NBA season is loaded with really good teams that just happen to not have huge separation from each other. And Sarah, that's before we even get into the West. In the West right now, 1 to 6 are separated by 4 games. 1 to 9 are separated by 4.5 games. It's ridiculous how close they're. And after Golden State had their, Steph got hurt, aftershock struggles, now they've won 5 in a row and are starting to play well. And obviously we'll get Steph back and up to speed and be a team that probably isn't going to finish 3-16-ish on the road, right? Like they're going to figure that out at some point. Denver right now is the one. I never thought Nikola Jokic could win a 3rd straight MVP because usually
he keeps playing. He's agree.
Gonna, right? Like if the season ended today, he would get the award most likely. I think. I know people say, "What about Luka?" or what? But what he's doing right now, and the Nuggets are the 1 seed, it's ridiculous.
First, I mean, his numbers. To your point about the high level basketball, and then I'll let you get back to it. Of every night, when you're locked into either a game you're calling or the team you care about, or what, sometimes you lose sight. I'm always like, wow, this was unbelievable. And then you start scrolling through stuff and you're like, wait, Jokic had what?
I know.
Donovan Mitchell had set what? But what Jokic is doing, don't get numb to these numbers. And it's not just the numbers. Like you watch him and wow.
And it's amazing. Like usually there is a narrative component to MVPs. We know this, and so there's usually like a fatigue with one guy or a redemption story or he finally got his. Like I think when Russ and Harden got theirs, there was a feeling of like, the narrative was working in their favor even going into the year because it was like, it's time for them to get it, right? And like with Giannis, after he wins 2 straight, it's kind of like, okay, he's kind of off the board mentally because it's, Jokic, I would have thought like people are going to be like, all right, like, subconsciously or consciously.
I think people were. I think people were heading into the year.
And now he's just been, if you're not checking the box score for the Nuggets games, just, go on the NBA app or ESPN app or whatever you use and just start like just looking at what Nikola Jokic is doing each game and then winning. Denver's one of those teams, though, that has not been able to get all the critical pieces healthy at the same time. If they do, Sarah, can they emerge from a West that right now has Denver as the 1, Memphis, who's dealt with their own share of significant injuries, as the 2, New Orleans, who has dealt with their own share of significant injuries, as the 3, and right now Zion out for 3 weeks, which, Sarah, I know you and I have the Nets-Pelicans game on Friday in New Orleans for yes. Dallas is the 4. They've won 7 straight. Luka might be leading the odds right now for MVP. 5 is Sacramento. 6 is the Clippers, who are lingering as that team that might have the most robust talent. They put it all together. Then Portland. Phoenix is the one that's kind of really fallen off. And Golden State, who I think many will see as the favorite until they're not, as the 9. Where do you kind of mentally slot Denver with what they're doing and their chances of representing the West in the finals?
That's a great question. Well, because you started going through all these teams. I think first let's look at towards the bottom of the standings. You said it about Golden State. It doesn't matter where they're sitting 9th now. 5. It doesn't matter where they sit. The question to me is going to be, what do they do anything at the trade deadline? How do they get healthy? Do they get whole? But with their type of experience with Steph, for all those reasons, you could never discount them. The Clippers, the question mark will always be, can they get healthy? And if they can get healthy, is there enough time for Ty Lue for them to actually have some room to work with to get things together? I think at some point this season, you may know better than me, I was reading, this had to be before, but him saying like, oh, if we just get at least like 15 games together. So which is like wild when you think about that in the context of 82 games. But I would put those two teams in a separate category for the star power they have at the top, and also the experience, like the veteran experience and the experience they have. I guess different experience for the Warriors and Clippers, what they've actually accomplished.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you would put them kind of like,
I would
two,
put
you'd
them
be
in
most like
different, intrigued by where I wouldn't be surprised if they were healthy and playing well. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm really fascinated. Luka, you said it, Dallas on a 7-game win streak. Luka has been extraordinary. I'm just not sure when it comes to the playoffs that he will have enough help, that he does truly have enough help that you can trust.
Agreed.
Denver, Memphis, and New Orleans are all fascinating to me. But circling back to your Denver question, you have a MVP and Jokic, who's, I think year by year, I think the other factor with him, he seems to add to his game every year, and his ability to read defenses, read coverages, Michael Malone kind of figuring out where they want to put him, initiating the offense on the floor. Our buddy Bruce Brown, like, talk about an ad like him of
he's been so Jokic, good for them.
Been shooting the 3-ball really well. Assuming Michael Porter Jr. can stay healthy. I think Jamal Murray too, even just him coming back from injury, the more he gets acclimated. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, yeah, I absolutely think they could win the West. And if you told me they were playing in the finals, that wouldn't surprise me, because I think this is a group that there was expectations of that in some capacity, or at least be towards the top of the West the last couple seasons. And they kept getting hit with some of those injuries that I think, in terms of pieces and the pieces that they have, especially with the parity of a lot of those teams in the top of the Western Conference, or the youthfulness of it. Memphis is a different type of club, and their brashness and their confidence in how they play. But I think just the different styles of, whether you look at the Pelicans, you look at Memphis, you look at Denver, I think all of those matchups to me are really interesting, because you have different styles of play in each of those teams. And when it comes to the postseason, like, sometimes that can be varied or altered in who is most dominant in really dictating how you're playing.
Memphis and New Orleans are the two really intriguing ones, right? Like, for as far as like just new teams on the rise who are led by, face of the league type stars with Ja and with Zion, but who have a lot of talent around those guys. Like, we saw the way Memphis was still able to compete with Golden State last year in the playoffs after Ja went down. But what's amazing about Memphis is they draft guys, no matter where they draft them, they hit on every pick. Like, they just have a roster loaded with NBA capable players. It's crazy. And so even if they go a long period of time without Desmond Bane, or without Ja Morant, or, if Dylan Brooks is out or whatever it is, they just have so many NBA capable bodies, and they play so hard, and they're so confident. They have such a, spice to them, that I think they just like have this attitude like, yeah, we're going to win, and last year they did have a pretty significant postseason run when you're talking about building a foundation to then eventually get over the top, right? Like, they took Golden State to the brink of a Game 7 in the second round. They were tied with 5 minutes to go in Game 6, playing on the road without Ja Morant. And then New Orleans, if you really look at the pieces of New Orleans and the way they all fit together, like, their roster is actually one that you would be like, if all those guys are there and they're all healthy, like, yeah, that's a team that can win a championship. It's crazy because they have not yet had the journey through the playoffs to put in our minds, I think, the legitimate idea of them like going to the finals this year. But really look at their roster and look at if they're healthy and the way the pieces all fit, right? And then look at some of the vulnerabilities in the rest of the West, even amongst the really good teams, and then say, okay, am I totally convinced that that's not the most talented team in the West? I think you could look at New Orleans and say, nah, you know what? I like that roster best. And if that's the case, then should we be writing them off just because they have not yet gone on a deep run? I think, Sarah, for me, I still would lean towards if Golden State's healthy, I'll pick them. I think I still would. And I think the Clippers I'd be wondering about. Right after Clippers I'd be intrigued by, but I think I'd go Golden State. Then I would go Memphis because Memphis showed me last year that they got some postseason experience under them. But then I think I would go New Orleans and then the Clippers, like just because I need to see.
And then Denver at the bottom.
Oh, geez, no. I was just forgetting about Denver. Yeah, no, I would go. Let me rephrase, because Denver's Golden State, then Denver.
Okay, yeah,
I would go Golden State.
Yes,
yeah, then Denver, then Memphis, then New Orleans, then the Clippers is how I would look at it right now with the field. But the fact that I think like being able to legitimately say like, yeah, like I could see New Orleans like going to the finals.
How much are you influenced by, we're going to say for every team, as always, health being if healthy, but how much are you influenced in your perception of that because of the amount of time that Zion has missed, because of him looking like an absolute gangbuster? And
Ingram too, missing so much time, right?
Yeah, exactly. That those two players just with their track records, that it's hard to put full confidence that they will actually be. It's more than just, if everyone's healthy, but it's something that you've seen time and time again, those players missing some time.
Yeah, you know what it is? It's like, and they've been winning games with those guys hurt, so that's actually encouraging to me.
By the way, Willie Green, I think, is a stud, though.
Yeah, great coach. Great
coach. Guys buy in. His game plan, strategy. Like, there's a lot of little things. I've been watching New Orleans that people in New Orleans raved about him when he first took over. But to watch his progression, I think, has also been something special.
It's interesting because there's certain players on each team that it's just the way this sport works. Like, you're not going to win. Like, the Nets don't have Kevin Durant. They're not going to win. There's no other reason besides that. If the Bucks don't have Giannis,
don't tell Kevin that.
Well, ultimately, not a single regular season game. If the Bucks don't have Giannis, they're not going to win, right? They're not going to win a championship. If the Celtics don't have Tatum, they're not. But then there's that, like the Warriors don't have Curry, but then there's that next layer, right? Where like certain teams where you're like, I feel like it's more of a thing with them, and I don't know if it's I feel like Milwaukee. Even though last year they ended up ultimately losing to the Celtics, like if you told me they weren't going to have Middleton for 2 rounds of the playoffs, I'd be like, they still could find their way through those 2 rounds. If you told me the Pelicans weren't going to have Brandon Ingram, I'd be like, as good as they've been in the regular season without him, I'd be like, no,
right.
Like they're not going to. So yeah, like the injury factor, whereas like with Memphis, I actually would be like more likely to be like, no, I think they might be able to spackle it together. I've seen it enough. Maybe not ultimately, but further. So the New Orleans definitely having those guys totally healthy is key for me. I also think it's a continuity thing. Like I think it's an essential thing for the Nets that they get all these reps together because they haven't had them. Like for Golden State, it's less important, obviously. For Milwaukee, it's less important. For Boston, it's less important. But come playoff time, you're going to need that continuity, whether you have it from years past or you've been able to build it this year. Sarah.
Because I also think,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because I also think too, 1 is continuity, 2 is you look at the playoffs and how you're scored. Like, there's a lot of teams that thrive offensively, or a good chunk of teams that thrive offensively in the regular season because they're creating points off turnovers and they're getting second chance points. And, they're getting a lot of quote unquote easy baskets. But that more often than not, you're not going to get in the postseason because it's more of a possession game. Things do slow down a little. You're not necessarily going to be turning teams over a ton. Like there's more value in some of those things. The concept, and this as well as anyone, the concept of a entire coaching staff being able to scout and prepare for a opponent and then seeing them 2 days later and 3 days later, that alters for as much as teams. And then that's why there's regular season teams and that's why there's playoff teams. But I also think that factors in when you're looking at lineups, combinations, at why teams are excelling or having success with a plug and play type of players or next man up mentality, because of maybe how you're generating wins, as opposed to, okay, well, how will that function when, rotations are tightened down and you're playing in different ways in the postseason? And I think that type of stuff factors in.
No doubt, Sarah. This has been wonderful. You are the best. We could do a million more hours on anything. We certainly could do a long deep dive pod into your amazing career and what you've accomplished.
No, thanks. We don't need to do that.
but I know my friend well enough to know she'd rather talk NBA. But I just want to ask you one real quick thing about yourself. One thing I appreciate as a play-by-play broadcaster is first of all, there's a million things I appreciate about you. I love like your silliness and how it brings out the best of me on air. I love that dynamic. It's so fun. But I also really appreciate how prepared you are every single game. Every game. What I know is like Sarah is always going to know like where the team is in their rankings in the league, and you're always aware of how they're playing lately. It always feels like you have been watching each NBA game of each and every team. It's amazing. And it's something I really appreciate as a play-by-play broadcaster, because it just makes it that much lighter a load. If you were going to say one thing, you don't need to, go all into the prep, but if there's one thing that you're like, I have to always do this to feel prepared before a game. And I know there's 15 things, but what is like the biggest staple of your game prep?
Wow. I didn't know you were going to come with the heat. This tough of a question. Can I say one, but kind of two?
Yeah.
I care a lot about how a team generates points. Even saying that, and whether that comes from, are they getting turnovers? Are they a good rebounding team? I mean, I know this is one thing baked into 20 things. But the important factors of how they defend the three, how they shoot the three, those type of things, those type of team stats, that I think gives you a lot of insight as to how a team plays and how they feel through the course of a game they feel like they're playing. So there's some teams that are not good rebounding teams and they're used to giving up a lot of rebounds. And so you may look at something and be like, wow, this is a major factor in this game, but there's things they think that they can weather. So that matters to me, are they, and I think the 3-point line has become such a major factor. So I think, one, collectively as a team, but two, for each individual player, how they're shooting the three, like that's something I always want to know is how does a guy shoot for his career? How is he shooting this season? And how has he been shooting lately? And yeah, I mean, I would say those. And then I just think you could look at numbers and it's different courses of the season. But to me, I think it's easy. Numbers can be very deceiving when you're looking at the whole, as opposed to what's been happening in the last 3 games, 5 games. And so that's always like, I always look, whether it's a guy or a team, what has been happening recently, and then what's been, the compilation of the whole season. Because that type of stuff, I think it informs us a lot throughout the course of a broadcast. If someone gets hot or someone's been cold, or, just what a team's doing. I don't know if I would stick with that answer if you asked me it tomorrow, because now I'm starting to think of all the things that matter.
Because you do a million things to prepare, as do I.
But I just think there's those baseline. Those are. What about you?
That was a really good answer. You know what? I'll have to think about that. I don't know what would be. There's so many things. I think there's a million things I do, but maybe the most important, it's so hard. I like having all the league rankings. Yeah. Putting in context where a team is on everything. And I like to know know how guys play. So like, is this inside their game or is this not? Kind of have a scouting report of some sort on each guy. Like, is he a black hole when he gets the ball in the post? And don't be surprised when he doesn't pass out of a double.
And I think that's the beauty of, that's a great point of why I get teased a lot for how many games I are watching stuff, or watching, a bad game. Like, why did you sit there and watch this 20-point? Because I think those are the things you pick up, that then you have a better feel for. Yeah. As you're watching
Agree.
The game.
And then you kind of know. Sarah, you're the best. Thank you for doing this.
Brooks, like I said, I'm honored.
Well, we appreciate having you. Cece will be back next week, everybody. Happy New Year to you all. You guys know the deal. New episodes every Thursday. Bonus episodes as well. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel. Subscribe for free. It's R2C2. And you can download our podcast or stream it wherever you get your pods. Thanks to Atta. Thanks to Sadie for all their production work and getting us grooving every week. And thanks to my colleague, friend, the Emmy Award-winning NBA analyst, Sarah Kustok, for stepping in today as my co-host. You the best, Kus. I'll see you in New Orleans.
You are. Back at you, Rooks.
Peace, everybody.